All right, welcome back. Today we've got our last objective in our algebra review, solving quadratic equations. Okay, now this is an extremely important skill to have moving through algebra, moving through all the rest of your math courses. Okay, quadratic equations, there's a lot of different applications to solving quadratic equations. Okay, unfortunately in this kind of abbreviated lesson here, we're not going to get into all those different places where this is going to show up in math and also in the real world. Okay, we'll just focus on the skills, but again, important concept, important thing to be able to do. You need to be able to solve quadratic equations. So let's go ahead and show you how to do that. All right, first method we're going to show you is solving quadratic equations by taking square roots. Okay, and this is going to be the simplest method. It's not always going to work for us, but it's a good place to start. And this method will work anytime we have a quadratic equation. Okay, so an equation with a second degree. Okay, 2 is the highest power. And the x only shows up in the x squared term. There's no other x's in it. Okay, when that's the case, what I can do is I can just work on isolating this x squared and then taking square root. So we can do that by adding a to both sides of this equation. That'll give me a 2x squared is equal to 8. And then I can divide both sides of the equation by 2, which will give me x squared equals 4. And then as a final step, to get rid of my squared piece of the x, we'll square root both sides of the equation, which will leave me with just the x on the left. And then on the right, we'll have square root of 4, which is a 2. And I'm going to say plus or minus 2, because if I square both 2 or negative 2, that'll give me the 4. Okay, so square rooting a number should give me two different answers. Okay, both the positive 2 and negative 2 would work for this equation. All right, again, that's solving a quadratic equation by taking square roots. Okay, again, that's our simplest method. In the note guide, there's also a part B to problem 1. Okay, that's for you to get a chance to practice this stuff. Why don't you take a minute, pause the video, work through part B, make sure you're okay with this stuff, throw a hand up and get your answer checked. And then once you're checked, once we know you're good with this, you can hit play and move on with the rest of the video. Now, like I said, taking square roots isn't always going to work for us when it comes to solving quadratics. That's why we're going to need other methods. And one of those methods is going to be utilizing the zero product property. Okay, it just says that for any real numbers a and b, if a times b equals 0, then either a is 0 or b is 0. Okay, so in other words, the only way I can multiply to 0 is if one of the two factors is a 0. Okay, how does that help us with quadratics? Well, if I'm looking to solve a quadratic equation that's in factored form, okay, like I have here, and I know this would be quadratic because if I multiplied the 4x times the x, I'd get 4x squared. Okay, so once I'm in factored form, which is why factoring is important to get things in factored form, once I'm in factored form, what I can do is I can just set each factor equal to 0. Okay, I can look at (4x plus 1 equals 0) and figure out the zeros of this first factor. Okay, because then 0 times whatever we have in the second factor will be 0. And then also separately, we'll solve the second factor equal to 0. The x minus 2 equals 0. And the zeros of those factors will be the zeros of the polynomial, okay, or the solutions of the polynomial. Okay, so starting off with this one, I just need to get the x by itself. So to do that, we can subtract by 1 on both sides. Apologize, my pen's glitching out on me a little bit. Just bear with me. Okay, so that'll be 4x equals negative 1. And then divide both sides by 4. We end up with x is equal to a just negative 1/4. Okay, so that'll be one of my solutions. And then for the second factor, we can add 2 to both sides just to get x equals 2. Okay, so I have 2 different solutions to my quadratic equation once again. And again, these will work because if I plugged in negative 1/4 to my first factor, I'd get a 0, okay, times whatever in my second factor will give me a 0. And then same idea, if I plug in a 2 in the second factor, I'll get a 0. 0 times anything is 0. Okay, so both these will give me zeros, will give me solutions to this quadratic equation. All right, part B is the same idea. Once again, take a minute, pause the video, work through part B, and then hit play to check your answer. Okay, in problem 3, we're going to once again utilize that zero product property. Difference here is we're not going to give you the quadratic in factored form. So first step is going to be to factor it, and then once we have it factored, we can set each factor equal to 0 and solve to utilize that zero product property. Okay, so what I have here is a trinomial, 3-term quadratic, and we'll factor this by writing it as the product of 2 binomials. Okay, to do that we can think reverse FOIL. To get the x squared, the only nice way to do that is going to be multiplying x by x here. Okay, x times x will give me that x squared. Now, to multiply to 15 and add to 8, I know that both of my last terms are going to be positive. This one's going to work out kind of nice here. And then what I need to do for my last terms is I need to figure out which factors of 15 will also add to 8 for me. Okay, 15 is actually kind of simple because the only ways to multiply to 15 are 1 times 15 or 3 times 5. And it looks like 3 times 5 are going to be the winner because they will also add to 8. Okay, so I can say x plus 3 and x plus 5. Okay, so that's my factored form. And if we went through that a little quick, might not be a bad idea to review the factoring part of the previous objective of objective 3. Okay, and once I have, and I guess we'll check and make sure we know that works. Okay, x times x will give me the x squared, and the 5x plus 3x will give me the 8x, and 3 times 5 would give me the 15. So we know we factored correctly. And then once we've got it factored, we'll set each factor equal to 0. Okay, we'll say that x plus 3 equals 0, and x plus 5 equals 0. So that'll give me solutions of x equals negative 3 by subtracting 3 from both sides of this equation, and x equals negative 5 by subtracting 5 from both sides of that equation. Okay, those will be my 2 solutions. Those will be my 2 zeros of that quadratic. Okay. Since it wasn't factored for us, might not be a terrible idea to actually plug these back into the original equation, confirm that we do get that 0. Okay, we're not going to do that in the video here, but okay, not a bad idea to do once you get to test time. All right, solving polynomials by factoring will probably be the trickiest thing we do in this lesson, so let's go ahead and run through another one together. This quadratic is going to be a little more difficult than we start off with, so we'll practice a little tougher one for you before we let you try on your own. Once again, I have a trinomial quadratic, so if I want to solve this by factoring, I need to factor it as a product of binomials. And the trick with this one is there's going to be multiple ways to get both the 4x squared and the negative 18. And what I'm going to have to do is try different combinations of both of those. So the different things I'll try for the 4 would be a 2 and 2 and a 4 and 1. And then for the 18, I'm going to have to figure out which one works between the 1 and 18, the 6 and 3, and then also the 9 and 2. Okay, so my first term is going to be made up of a combination of these factors, and my last terms will be these ones here. And I'm just going to, well, kind of guess and check at this a little bit. I guess the thing I do know is to multiply for the last terms to a negative. I'm going to have one positive and one negative last term here. And I need a difference of 21, so I need kind of a bigger difference here. So let's just try something. Let's go 2x times 2x. And I need to add to this 21, so we need something a little bigger. Let's try the 9. We'll make that negative to make it more of a negative number. And a positive 2. And I'm not sure if that's going to work. Let's FOIL things together to see. 2x times 2x is a 4x. All right, 2x times negative 9 will give me a negative, 2x times 2x is 4x squared. Okay, 2x times negative 9 will give me a negative 18x. And then 2 times 2x will give me a plus 4x. And 2 times negative 9 will give me a negative 18. Okay, we've got the x squared part. We've got the negative 18 part up here. But our issue is that the inner and outer don't add together to get the negative 21x. Negative 18 plus 4 is going to give me a negative 14x. Okay, so I don't have a big enough negative number. And that kind of clues me in that I need to kind of come up with some bigger number combinations to make a bigger difference. Okay, I'm not going to go as far as multiplying the 4 times the 9 to get a negative 27. That'd be too much. But I'm going to give this a shot. I'm going to go with the 4 and the 6 together to see if I can get closer. Okay, so literally what I'm doing here is kind of guessing and checking until I figure out which factors work for me. And as a math teacher, could I probably do more of this in my head and not have to talk through it all? Yes, absolutely. But I want to kind of show you how this process works on the trickier ones. So let's go ahead and try this again using the 4x times just a 1x to get that 4x squared. Like we said, we want a bigger negative, so I'm going to multiply the 4x times the negative 6, and that'll be 4x plus 3 for the first factor. And let's check and see if that works. Okay, 4x times 1x is going to give me a 4x squared. So we're good with the first term. Okay, 4x times negative 6 will give me a negative 24x. 3 times x will give me a plus 3x. Yep, and those two parts will combine to give me a negative 21x. And then 3 times negative 6 will give me a negative 18. All right, so we found the winning combination. We found the factors that work. Okay, again, if you have to kind of guess and check more than once, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. And then from there, once again, we can set each of those factors equal to 0. We can say that 4x plus 3 equals 0. And then also x minus 6 equals 0. And solve each of those kind of factors equal to 0 separately. For the first one, we'll subtract 3 from both sides. That'll give me a 4x is equal to negative 3. And then divide by 4. So we end up with x equals negative 3/4. And then for the next one, we can add 6 to both sides and just end up with x equals positive 6 as my second solution. All right, common theme we're seeing here is quadratics always have two solutions. Okay, one might show more than once, but two different solutions. Okay, so there's another example of factoring a quadratic to find the solution to the quadratic equation. Okay, once again, there is a part C and D for this one. Okay, this will be the tricky one for the lesson. So pause the video. It's okay if you spend a good 5-10 minutes factoring through these, finding these solutions. Okay, then once again, check your answer before you press play and move on to the last part. All right, and last thing we're going to look at for this lesson is solving quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Okay, now solving quadratics by taking square roots or factoring are nice, but they're not always going to work for us. Okay, the reason we have this ugly thing here, this quadratic formula, is that no matter what type of quadratic we look at, okay, whether it's kind of the nice ones we're going to deal with this year or the uglier ones you'll get into future years, the quadratic formula is always going to work for you. Okay, so it just says this: for any quadratic ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, the solution of this equation is going to be given by this formula here. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, don't worry, don't need to memorize that for test time. We will give you that for test time. And as far as where this is coming from, if we wanted to add 10 minutes to this video here, we could prove the quadratic formula for you. Okay, for this abbreviated lesson, we'll just worry about using it, and we can, okay, you'll get it proven for you in some future class. Let's go ahead and apply that. Okay, so I have a quadratic here. Now, first thing, for this formula to work, my quadratic equation has to be set equal to 0. Okay, just like with factoring, we have to have it equal to 0. So if it's not equal to 0, your first step is going to be to solve for 0. I can do that by subtracting 2x from both sides of this equation. And then also subtracting 8 from both sides. We'll just kind of pile those up here. So that's going to leave me with x squared minus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. And now I can identify my a, b, and c to plug into the quadratic formula here. Okay, for the a, that's going to be the coefficient on the x squared term. Now in this case, that's just a 1. Okay, so we're going to write a is equal to a 1. B, we'll use what's in front of the x term, including the sign. So we'll say b is a negative 2 in this case. And then for the c, we'll use the constant term, again, once with the sign. So my c will be a negative 8. Okay, now I have my a, b, and c to start filling in the quadratic equation. And I'm going to copy it down here, and I'd recommend anytime you have a nasty equation you're working with, copy that thing down, okay, in the space you're working on it. Okay, so let's fill that in. First thing we have is the negative b. That's just going to be taking the b value and making it negative, so the opposite of b. It's another way we could say it. So negative 2 will just be a positive 2. Next we have a plus or minus, okay, because as we've seen so far today, quadratic equations always have two solutions. We'll have one with a positive here, one with a negative. Okay, then we have a square root, kind of like we started off with to cancel out squares. There's a square root in here. Inside the square root we have a b squared, so that's going to be my negative 2 squared. All right, I'm going to put that in parentheses to make sure that when I square this, I do get a positive value out. All right, minus 4 times a, which is a 1. I don't need to write it, but we'll write it anyways. Okay, times c, which is a negative 8. I'm going to write that in parentheses just to make sure I don't confuse multiplying by a negative 8 rather than subtracting 8. Okay, then all over 2a. A is 1, so we'll say all over 2 times 1 as my pen lags here. All right, let's figure out what this is equal to. And the first step I'm going to take for reducing this down is figuring out what's inside of my root here, reducing that down. So we'll leave the 2 plus or minus by itself to begin with. We've got the square root. And then let's figure out what this part's equal to. Okay, negative 2 squared is going to be a 4. Okay, remember, anytime you square something, you'll get a positive. And then for the second part, we've got a negative 4 times 1 times negative 8. Well, negative times negative I know is going to give me a positive. And 4 times 8 is going to give me a 24. Oops, undo that. 4 times 8 is 32. Wake up, Mr. Bailey, wake up. Okay, so inside the root we have a 4 plus 32, in other words, a 36. That'll be a nice root to take in a second. All right, over 2 times 1, which is just a 2. Okay, so this will turn into then a 2 plus or minus square root of 36 is just a 6 over 2. And as I run out of room here, we can turn this into 2 separate solutions, one for the positive, one for the negative. So we can write it as 2 plus 6 over 2, which is just a 2 plus 6 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is a 4. And 2 minus 6 over 2. 2 minus 6 would be a negative 4. Negative 4 over 2 would be a negative 2. All right, so there's my 2 solutions. All right, that is how the quadratic formula works. Okay, it's kind of a big, ugly, nasty formula, but once you run through it a few times, it's actually not too bad to work through. Okay, that's part A. Like usual, there's a part B. Now the video's over, but like always, work through part B, get your answer checked, make sure you know what you're doing with this stuff before you move on to the practice, before you move on to the Math Excel.